Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're digging into something ancient, something really powerful, an eye for an eye.
It's a phrase everyone knows, right?
Exactly. It feels like this core principle of justice, maybe? But it's also, the source of these endless cycles of revenge, feuds that just go on and on.
Yeah, they seem impossible to break sometimes.
So the big question we're asking today is, what is it? What's that deep, almost primal satisfaction humans seem to get from fighting for those who are gone, seeking this retribution that, it can't actually undo the harm, can it?
No, it can't. The original harm is done.
So our deep dive today, it's going to take us on a bit of a journey through history, law, theology.
Biology, psychology, sociology, even math, actually.
Right. And our mission is to really understand why this instinct is so strong, so pervasive.
Yeah.
And crucially, can we find a way past it? How does a species like ours, seemingly wired for revenge, consciously choose something else, like restoration? Okay, so let's unpack this. An eye for an eye. We hear it, and maybe we think, brutal, simple vengeance.
That's the common image, yeah.
But is that where it really started? Was that the original point of Lex Talionis? Or was there something else going on, something maybe counterintuitive?
That's a great place to start because, the origins are much more nuanced than just pure revenge. Lex Talionis, the law of retaliation. It wasn't invented to encourage payback.
No.
No, actually quite the opposite. It came about because there was this desperate need to, civilize vengeance, to put some limits on it.
Limit it? How so?
Well, think about the ancient world before these big legal codes. An injury, even a small one, could easily spark a private blood feud. Families fighting families, escalating.
Right, things spiraling out of control.
Exactly. Disproportionate violence. So the Code of Hammurabi around 1754 BCE is probably the most famous early example. Law number 196 says, if a man destroy the eye of another man, they shall destroy his eye.
Sounds pretty harsh. An eye for an eye.
It does sound harsh to us now, yeah.
Yeah.
But the revolutionary thing about Hammurabi's code wasn't that it demanded an eye. It was that it limited the demand to just one eye.
Ah, okay. I see.
It was like the first fence built around runaway vengeance. It took violence out of purely private hands and made it regulated, state-controlled justice. Right. The hidden message was an eye for an eye and nothing more. It was actually a step towards order, but and this is crucial. You have to understand the duality in Hammurabi's code. It was proportional, yes, but justice wasn't universal. Not at all.
What do you mean?
Well, the punishment depended heavily on your social status. Hammurabi society had basically three classes. The elite, nobles.
Okay.
Then the mushkanu commoners. And the ardu slaves.
Right.
And this eye for an eye idea, it really only applied between equals, between the Amalu.
Seriously?
Oh, yeah. So if you, an Amalu, knocked out another Amalu's tooth, your tooth was knocked out. Fair enough, maybe. But if you knocked out a commoner's tooth, just a fine, a monetary payment.
Wow.
Same with eyes. Destroy a gentleman's eye, you lose yours. Destroy a commoner's eye or a slave's eye, you just pay some silver.
So it's like justice, but only for some.
Precisely. Which shows the code wasn't just law, it was also kind of royal propaganda. It paints Hammurabi as this great protector, looking out for the weak.
While locking in the social hierarchy.
Exactly. It's this weird paradox. You have these advanced ideas like proportionality, even innocent until proven guilty in some aspects, right alongside deep baked-in social inequality.
That is a fascinating paradox. Makes you think about today, doesn't it? Echoes of that. But okay, so this principle, eye for an eye, it didn't stay static. It evolved, especially in religious thinking, right? Moved beyond just the literal.
Oh, absolutely. You see this incredible journey within the Abrahamic faiths. Almost like a continuous effort to humanize the concept.
How so? In Judaism, for instance.
Well, in Judaism, you definitely find eye for eye, tooth for tooth in the Torah, Exodus, Leviticus, Deuteronomy. But, and this is key, it was understood mostly as a guide for judges in civil cases.
For judges, not for individuals taking revenge.
Exactly. To ensure the punishment fit the crime proportionally. It wasn't a license for personal vendettas. Leviticus 19.18 explicitly says, do not seek revenge or bear a grudge, but love your neighbor as yourself.
Right, that's a very different message.
And then Rabbinic Judaism took this massive step, a truly transformative one.
Okay.
They interpreted eye for an eye, not as literal physical harm, but as requiring monetary compensation.
Money instead of maiming.
Yes. There's actually no biblical record of it ever being applied literally, maybe because it was impractical or could lead to more injustice, like how does a blind person blind someone else fairly?
Good point.
So this shift It's huge. It moves the goalpost from inflicting equal suffering to actually restoring the loss, making the victim whole financially, at least. It's a big cognitive leap.
Okay, so moving from equal harm to repairing damage. And then Christianity takes it even further, doesn't it, with Jesus' teachings?
Precisely. You get the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus says, "You have heard that it was said, eye for eye and tooth for tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on your right cheek, turn to him the other also."
Turn the other cheek. That feels radical.
It is radical, but it's important to see it not necessarily as abolishing the old law entirely, but as a profound reframing. It kind of decouples things.
Decouples what?
The state's job to maintain justice may be using proportionality from the individual's moral path, which is now about forgiveness, love, even for enemies. It offers a route to psychological closure that state punishment alone might not provide.
I see. And Islam. Is there a similar idea?
There is, yeah. You have qua-retaliation and kind mentioned in the Quran, but there's also very strong encouragement to accept monetary compensation, called daya, or even better, to offer forgiveness. These are seen as more virtuous paths. So again, a clear mitigation of pure, raw retaliation.
That's quite an evolution, from strict Babylonian law to these calls for forgiveness. But let's get back to that feeling. Why does getting even feel so good sometimes, if all this wisdom points away from it? Why the urge?
Well, that's where biology comes in. It turns out that feeling, that satisfaction, it's not just in your head, culturally speaking. It's literally in your brain, a measurable biological event.
Really? How does that work?
When someone wrongs you
Yeah.
and you get a chance to retaliate, specific parts of your brain's reward system light up like a Christmas tree.
The reward system, like when you eat chocolate.
Exactly like that.
Yeah.
We're talking about areas like the dorsal striatum and, maybe more famously, the nucleus accumbens the enalac. These are the same bits that get excited by food, sex, money, even addictive drugs.
So getting revenge gives you a dopamine hit.
Pretty much. The act of retaliation is neurologically linked to pleasure. It feels rewarding on a very basic level. It scratches an itch, you could say.
Which leads to maybe not great places.
Well, it leads some researchers to talk about revenge obsession as a kind of hidden addiction.
An addiction. Seriously.
Think about it. The brain seems to process the craving for vengeance and the act itself using similar dopamine pathways involved in substance abuse. It creates this internal battle.
A battle between what?
Between that primitive, reward-seeking part, the striatum yelling, yes, do it, it'll feel great, and the more evolved part, the prefrontal cortex, your PFC.
The sensible part.
The sensible part, exactly.
Yeah.
The part that handles long-term planning, impulse control, consequences. The PFC kind of knows that revenge, while maybe sweet for a second, often leads to really bad long-term outcomes, that cycle that never ends. Often it's the primitive reward system winning that battle over and over.
So our brain basically gives us a little reward, a little high, for acting vengefully. Wow, okay, that maybe explains why some action movies feel oddly satisfying, even if we know it's not healthy.
It could play a role, yeah.
But here's the twist, right? This idea that revenge brings closure, that it makes things right. You're saying that's mostly a myth.
Largely, yes. Psychological research is pretty clear on this. Acting on aggressive impulses, like taking revenge, doesn't usually purge the anger. It doesn't provide catharsis.
It doesn't. What does it do then?
It actually tends to amplify the anger. It keeps you focused on the original hurt, planning revenge, carrying it out.
Yeah.
It forces you to keep thinking about the offense, about the person who wronged you. Sir Francis Bacon said centuries ago, it keeps wounds green, prevents healing.
So instead of closure, you just stay angry.
Or worse, the aftermath is rarely pure satisfaction. You might get that fleeting rush, yeah, but it's often followed by regret, guilt, maybe shame, and definitely fear of retaliation. It's a very bittersweet feeling, as researchers call it.
Bittersweet. Not exactly the triumphant feeling we imagine.
Not usually, no. And zooming out, psychologists call this a major error in effective forecasting.
Effective forecasting, meaning
we're really bad at predicting how we'll feel in the future. We chase revenge because we think it will make us feel powerful, vindicated, satisfied, better. That prediction gets fueled by those reward signals in the brain we talked about.
But we're wrong.
We're often wrong. We overestimate the good feelings and vastly underestimate the bad stuff. The rumination, the anxiety, the potential for escalation. Real psychological closure, the research suggests, doesn't come from hitting back. It comes from other things like grieving the loss, trying to understand what happened, and, yeah, ultimately often forgiveness.
Okay, so if it's often unsatisfying, keeps wounds open, and we're bad at predicting how it'll make us feel.
Yeah.
Why is the instinct so damn strong? Why is it there in the first place?
Well, because it's not just a flaw. It's not a pathology. That retributive instinct is actually a deeply rooted part of how humans became social creatures. It was forged by evolution.
Evolution wanted us to be vengeful.
Not exactly vengeful, but willing to enforce norms. Think about altruistic punishment.
Altruistic punishment. Sounds like a contradiction.
It does. A bit. It means being willing to punish someone who breaks the group's rules, even if it costs you personally. Time, energy, maybe even risk.
Why would evolution favor that?
Because groups that could enforce cooperation, that could punish free riders and cheaters, were more successful. They could build trust, work together on large projects, outcompete other groups. Altruistic punishment was critical for building the large-scale societies we live in.
So punishing rule breakers helped the group survive, even if it cost the punisher.
Exactly. And what's really fascinating is you see the basic building blocks of this sense of fairness, even in other primates.
Like monkeys.
Like capuchin monkeys, yeah. There are famous experiments where they'll reject a perfectly good reward, like a piece of cucumber, if they see another monkey getting something much better, like a grape for the same task. They literally throw the cucumber back at the researcher.
A cucumber rage.
Basically. You see similar fairness sensitivity in dogs, too. It suggests the roots of morality are pretty ancient. For humans, this got amplified by gene-culture coevolution.
Gene-culture coevolution.
Yeah, the idea that our genes and our culture shape each other. We developed complex cultural learning, sophisticated rules for behavior. Groups with better cooperative norms thrived. This put evolutionary pressure back on our psychology, favoring instincts for fairness, for following rules, and for punishing those who don't.
Okay, so it helped us cooperate within our group.
Right. But here's the dark side. That same instinct has a flip side. It's got this two-faced nature.
Also.
Within your group, it's the foundation of morality, justice, cooperation. Keeps things running smoothly. But between groups, it becomes the engine of tribalism and conflict.
Because the other group doesn't follow our rules.
Exactly. An out-group with different customs, different beliefs, they can look like the ultimate norm violators. So the same instinct that promotes harmony inside the group fuels conflict outside it. The instinct's the same, just the target changes.
That's sobering. The same impulse builds us up and tears us down. So how does this individual instinct scale up? How does it shape whole groups, communities, even nations?
Well, it plugs right into our tendency for tribalism. Social identity theory is really key here.
Social identity theory. Refresh my memory.
Basically, it says we're hardwired to categorize people, put them in boxes, us and them. And our own sense of self-worth, our self-esteem gets tied up with the status of our group, our in-group.
Right. We want our team to be the best.
Exactly. There are 3 basic steps. First, social categorization, just automatically sorting people. Then, social identification, we adopt the identity of our group, I am one of us. And finally, social comparison.
Comparing us to them.
And crucially, trying to find ways that us is better than them. This drive for positive distinctiveness leads to in-group favoritism. We like people in our group more, trust them more, and often it leads to suspicion, distrust, even derogation of out-groups.
And this happens easily.
Incredibly easily. The minimal group paradigm experiments show this. You can divide people into groups based on totally arbitrary things, like flipping a coin or whether they prefer one abstract painter over another.
And instantly they favor their own group.
Instantly. They'll allocate more points or rewards to anonymous members of their own meaningless group than to the other group. It's a really deep-seated tendency.
Wow. So it's not always about real conflict over resources.
Often it isn't, no. Or at least resources are just part of it. Conflict is frequently a competition for identity, for status, for self-esteem. Putting down the out-group can actually make the in-group feel better about itself, boost morale, increase cohesion.
So conflict can actually strengthen the group.
In a way, yes. It can become this sort of powerful ritual for reinforcing who we are. The out-group acts as a negative mirror. We are defined by not being them, which makes peace really tricky sometimes.
Why?
Because if your group identity is built on opposition to the other, then making peace, finding common ground, it can feel like you're losing a part of yourself, undermining the very definition of us. It's psychologically threatening.
That makes intractable conflicts make a bit more sense. It's not just about land or resources, it's about identity itself.
Very often, yes.
And here's where it gets really weirdly logical, right? Game theory.
Yeah.
How even rational people get stuck in these cycles.
Exactly. The cold, hard logic of it. We need to talk about the iterated prisoner's dilemma and this strategy called tit for tat, or TFT.
Okay, tit for tat. Sounds simple.
Deceptively simple. The basic rule is cooperate on the first move and then just copy whatever your opponent did on the last move.
So if they cooperate, you cooperate. If they defect, you defect.
Right. It has some nice properties. It's nice because it never defects first. It's provocable because it immediately punishes defection. It's forgiving because if the opponent goes back to cooperating, TFT immediately follows suit. And it's clear, easy to understand, seems like it should promote cooperation.
Seems like it. But
its greatest weakness is actually tied to its strength, that strict, immediate reciprocity. It works great in a perfect world, but in the real world, things are noisy.
Noisy, meaning?
Meaning mistakes happen, misperceptions happen. Maybe you thought the other side defected, but it was just a misunderstanding or an accident. Now, imagine two players, both using simple TFT, and one side defects, even by accident. What happens?
The other side immediately defects back in retaliation.
Right. And then the first side sees that defection and retaliates again.
Oh.
Yeah. They get locked into this catastrophic, unending death spiral of mutual retaliation, defect, all triggered by one single, possibly accidental first move. There's no way out with pure TFT.
Wow. That's bleak. Does that actually happen?
The model provides a chillingly accurate picture of many real-world situations. Think about trade wars. One country puts on a tariff, the other retaliates with its own tariffs, back and forth, escalation.
Or military arms races.
Or military escalations, absolutely. The profound and kind of tragic lesson here is that these endless cycles of revenge aren't always caused by pure irrationality or deep-seated hatred. Sometimes they're the logical outcome of a simple, seemingly rational strategy, strict reciprocity, operating in an imperfect, noisy world. Any system based purely on tit-for-tat punishment without some way to break the cycle, some way to de-escalate, is inherently unstable.
Okay, so we've seen the history, the biology, the psychology, the group dynamics, even the math. It's a lot. It shows how deep this eye for an eye instinct runs.
It really does.
But understanding all that, that has to be the first step towards choosing something different, right? Towards consciously taking another path.
Absolutely. Understanding is the foundation for change.
So where do we start? How do we break free? Maybe start with the justice system itself.
That's a great place to focus because the dominant model in many places is still heavily retributive.
Retributive.
Yeah.
Meaning focused on punishment.
Exactly. It asks, what law was broken? Who's to blame? What punishment did they deserve? The focus is backward-looking on the offense and the punishment.
Okay. Is there an alternative?
There is. It's a fundamentally different approach called restorative justice, or RJ.
Restorative justice. What does that look like?
Instead of focusing only on punishment, RJ asks different questions. It asks, who was harmed? What are their needs? And whose obligation is it to meet those needs?
So the focus shifts to the victim and the harm done.
Precisely. The goal isn't just to punish the offender, but to actually repair the harm as much as possible, to heal relationships, address the root causes of the offense.
How does that work in practice?
While there are different processes, things like victim-offender mediation, where the person harmed and the person who caused the harm meet with facilitators to talk about what happened and its impact. It gives victims a voice, allows them to ask questions, and helps offenders understand the real human consequences of their actions. It aims for meaningful accountability.
Does it work?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the evidence is actually pretty compelling. Studies show significantly higher victim satisfaction rates with RJ compared to traditional courts, sometimes up to 85%. Victims often feel heard, respected, and less fearful.
And for the offenders.
It seems to reduce reoffending. Meta-analyses show reductions in recidivism, maybe around 14% to 25% on average. Plus, it's often not cost-effective. Some estimates suggest every pound or dollar spent on RJ saves 9 down the line in reduced crime and justice system costs.
So, better for victims, better for reducing future crime, and cheaper. Sounds promising.
It's a real paradigm shift, moving from just inflicting pain to actively trying to repair harm and rebuild community.
Okay, that's the system level. What about forgiveness? We talked about how religions encourage it, but you mentioned game theory earlier. Does logic have anything to say about forgiveness?
It absolutely does, and this is fascinating. You might think forgiveness is purely emotional, maybe spiritual, maybe just really hard. But game theory actually suggests it can be a logically superior strategy.
How can forgiveness be logical?
Remember how pure tit for tat gets stuck in those death spirals in a noisy world?
Yeah, the accidental defections leading to endless retaliation.
Right. Well, researchers tested variations of TFT that incorporate some level of forgiveness. Strategies like tit for tat with forgiveness, where you might randomly cooperate even after the other player defected, or tit for two tats.
Tit for two tats.
Yeah. Basically, you tolerate one defection from the other player before you retaliate. You give them a pass the first time.
And how do these forgiving strategies do?
They consistently outperform strict tit-for-tat in simulations that mimic real-world noise and uncertainty. They are more resilient, they can break out of those retaliation cycles and get back to cooperation.
Why? What's the logic?
Well, there's a simple but profound cost-benefit analysis happening. Think about tit-for-two-tats. What's the cost? Occasionally, you might cooperate when the other side defects, you get taken advantage of once. That's the cost.
Okay.
But what's the benefit? By absorbing that one small hit, you avoid triggering that potentially endless, mutually destructive cycle of retaliation. You preserve the possibility of restoring a valuable long-term cooperative relationship. The small cost of absorbing one undeserved hit is often far outweighed by the huge cumulative gains from future cooperation.
So forgiveness isn't just being naive or letting people walk all over you.
Not strategically, no. It reframes forgiveness as a calculated, intelligent investment in future cooperation. In many situations, especially long-term relationships, it's actually the most rational, the most profitable, and ultimately the smartest choice for everyone involved.
That's a powerful way to think about it. Forgiveness is strategy. Okay, so understanding our nature, these instincts, the pitfalls, the potential for restoration, it gives us a kind of toolkit, doesn't it, for building a better world, practically speaking.
Absolutely. It moves from abstract understanding to concrete application.
Like how we choose our leaders, maybe.
Definitely. A society that understands these dynamics would ideally look for leaders who demonstrate cognitive complexity, the ability to see nuance, not just black and white. Leaders who show empathy, who prioritize de-escalation over provocation.
Leaders who unite rather than divide.
Exactly. Leaders who can articulate what are called superordinate goals, goals that are bigger than any one faction, goals that require different groups to work together. Leaders who define the in-group as broadly as possible, ideally all citizens or even all of humanity.
And in our communities, how do we apply this?
Well, the contact hypothesis gives us a clue. It suggests that prejudice and conflict between groups can be reduced through meaningful cooperative interaction.
So getting different groups to actually work together.
Yes, but crucially, working together towards shared goals on an equal footing. In integrated workplaces, diverse schools, community projects, that kind of contact can break down stereotypes and build trust.
Makes sense. What about on a global scale? Nations dealing with each other.
Same logic applies, really. Think about that generous tit-for-tat idea. For things like climate change, global health, nuclear disarmament, nations need to be willing to make cooperative first moves.
Even if others don't immediately follow.
Even in the face of temporary defections by others, someone has to be willing to absorb a small hit, to be generous, to break the cycle of mistrust for the long-term collective good. It requires strategic patience.
And finally, what about us as individuals? Living our own lives. How does understanding all this help?
On a personal level, just knowing that the urge for revenge is partly a neurological craving, partly a cognitive error in predicting happiness, that gives you power. It gives you distance.
Distance to choose a different response.
Exactly. You can recognize that intense emotional energy that comes from feeling wrong, that grievance, and you can consciously choose to rechannel it. Instead of plotting revenge, maybe you channel it into personal growth, achieving something constructive. You know that old saying, the best revenge is massive success.
Yeah.
There's actually some deep psychological and strategic wisdom in that. Focus on building your own life, not tearing down someone else's.
So across all these levels, from brains to nations, it comes down to conscious choices and smart design.
I think so. You could say the ultimate meta solution is conscious system design. Human nature with its mix of cooperation, fairness, tribalism, retribution, that's probably pretty constant. It is what it is.
Right.
But the games we play, the rules of interaction, the structures of our societies, our justice systems, our political systems, those are variable. We design them.
So we can design them better.
We can try. By intentionally designing systems that reward cooperation, that make forgiveness easier and safer, that create inclusive, superordinate goals. We can create environments where our better angels, as Lincoln put it, are more likely to prevail over our more primitive retaliatory instincts. build systems that naturally break the cycles.
So that was our deep dive. An eye for an eye. It's so much more than just an old law, isn't it? It's like a window into who we are.
Deeply embedded.
This primal instinct. Maybe it helped civilize us once by limiting feuds. But now, in our connected world, it often seems maladaptive. That satisfaction it promises. It's fleeting, a neurochemical trick.
A cognitive illusion, yeah. Often keeps the wounds open, fuels those cycles of pain.
And at the group level, it drives tribalism, locks us into conflict. That death spiral from game theory.
But the key takeaway, I hope, is one of empowerment. Real empowerment. Because understanding the science behind it, all the neuroscience, the psychology, the evolutionary roots, the game theory math, the social dynamics, understanding it means we are no longer just puppets dancing on these ancient strings.
Knowledge gives us choice.
Exactly. It gives us the capacity for conscious, deliberate choice. We can see the instinct rising, understand where it comes from, and choose a different response.
So the choices are there. You, listening, can choose to support different kinds of justice, like restorative justice that focuses on healing.
You can choose to practice strategic forgiveness in your own life, not as weakness, but as smart strategy.
You can choose to advocate for leaders who seek to unite us with common goals, not divide us for gain.
And personally, you can choose where to put that powerful emotional energy when you feel wronged, towards building something better for yourself, rather than tearing something down.
I guess. The whole journey, from that ancient demand for an eye for an eye to trying to build a more balanced, cooperative future, it really is the journey from acting on a primal, automatic default
to making a conscious, deliberate, informed choice.
Maybe that's the core challenge for us, for our species, to understand our own nature so deeply, so clearly, that we can finally, maybe, transcend its limitations.
It's a profound challenge, but also perhaps our greatest potential.
This is DigitView.